The cathedral's vast interior, fractured by time and ruin, held a fragile quiet, punctuated only by the soft rustling of ragged fabric and the distant, ethereal hum of the choir's hymn. I found myself drawn to the far corner, where Marek knelt, her slender frame bowed low in prayer. The candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows across her pale face, illuminating eyes that burned with a fierce, trembling light. Her whispered hymns blended seamlessly with the choir's disembodied melody, a fragile thread of faith woven into the vast tapestry of despair that had become our nightly ritual. Mara's devotion was a beacon in the darkness, a fragile flame flickering stubbornly against the encroaching shadows. Yet as I watched her, a knot of unease twisted deeper in my gut. The choir's songs had grown louder, more insistent, weaving into our souls with a power that felt both sacred and sinister. I wondered how long such faith could withstand the tides of fear that were rising like a storm around us. The tension within our group was palpable. Caleb, ever the skeptic, had been growing restless, his sharp eyes darting over every whispered prayer and hopeful glance. I caught sight of him now, standing rigid against a crumbling pillar, his lean frame tense as he watched Mara with a mixture of frustration and something colder, fear, perhaps, or anger. His voice, when he spoke, cut through the quiet like a shard of glass. "Do you really believe this choir is salvation?" Caleb's words were harsh, accusatory. "Or is it just a cruel trick, a sound that lures us deeper into darkness?" Mara's head snapped up, her haunting eyes flashing with a desperate light. "It is salvation," she insisted, voice trembling but resolute. "The choir promises us peace beyond this shattered world. We must hold to faith, even when all else is lost." Caleb shook his head, stepping forward, his voice rising. "Faith won't save us from vanishing like the others. This choir, it's a trap. We were fools to listen, fools to hope." The words hung heavy in the air, a rift opening between belief and doubt. I felt the weight of leadership pressing down, the fragile bonds holding us together starting to fray. I stepped between them, hands raised in a gesture of peace, my voice calm but firm. "We must hold together. Our survival depends on unity, not division. The choir's nature is still a mystery, yes, but despair will only hasten our end. Let us seek understanding, not conflict." Elias, standing nearby with his stocky frame and scarred face, nodded grimly. "We need order, or we'll fall apart before the choir's secrets reveal themselves." But beneath my words, a storm of doubt churned. Was the choir truly a beacon of hope, or something darker, more insidious? Each night, its melodies wrapped tighter around us, a sonic embrace both comforting and suffocating. The lines between faith and fear blurred, and I feared what lay ahead. As the choir's hymns swelled, echoing through the shattered nave, the air thickened with a suffocating weight. The ancient stones seemed to pulse with energy, shadows shifting just beyond sight. I caught Mara's glance, her eyes shining with unwavering belief, and Caleb's, sharp with suspicion. Between them, I stood caught in the fragile balance between hope and dread. The night deepened, and the choir's song grew louder still, a haunting melody that promised salvation and whispered of loss. I knew the coming days would test us all, our faith, our courage, and the very bonds that held us together. And as the final notes faded into the cold stone, a single thought echoed in my mind: how much more could we endure before the choir claimed us all? I closed my journal slowly, the ink still wet with the night's thoughts. The fragile piece we clung to was slipping through our fingers like smoke. The choir's hymn was no longer just a song, it was a summons, and soon we would have to answer. The night air inside the ruined cathedral was thick with an uneasy silence, as if the very stones themselves held their breath. We gathered as always beneath the shattered arches, our small band of survivors huddled close, flickering candles casting long, wavering shadows over the cracked stone floor. The choir began again, an eerie, disembodied hymn that rolled through the cavernous space, its voices ethereal yet hauntingly clear. Each note seemed to vibrate deep within my chest, a sound both beautiful and terrible, promising salvation yet tinged with menace. I watched Mara, her slender frame tense with reverence, lips moving in soft prayer as she sang along with the invisible voices. Her pale face was a mask of fragile hope, eyes glistening with unshed tears. Nearby, Elias stood rigid, his stocky form casting a protective shadow over the others. His scarred features were drawn tight with skepticism and fear, his gaze darting uneasily toward the core's source, or rather, the absence of it. As the hymn reached its crescendo, a sudden silence fell, sharp and unnatural. I saw it then. Jonas was gone. One moment he was there, eyes closed in solemn attention. The next, nothing but the empty space where he had sat. A chill raced down my spine, the quiet shattered only by the lingering echoes of the choir's fading hymn. Shock rippled through the group like a physical blow. Mara gasped, clutching the edge of a broken pew, her voice trembling as she whispered prayers for Jonas's safe passage. Elias's jaw clenched, fists balled at his sides, his protective instincts flaring into desperation. Caleb's skepticism erupted like a spark to dry tinder. "This isn't salvation," he spat bitterly. "It's a trap. A curse." Sister Agnes, ever the voice of tempered wisdom, raised a frail hand for silence. Her eyes, deep set and lined with the weight of years, scanned the faces around her. "We cannot yet understand the choir's nature," she said softly, "but we must not let fear fracture our resolve. There is history here, buried beneath these stones, that may hold answers." The room grew tense, divisions sharpening between those clinging to faith and those consumed by dread. I felt the weight of leadership settle heavily upon me. I knew that waiting passively would only invite further loss. Tonight, I would venture into the cathedral's shadowed depths, into the hidden chambers whispered of in fragmented tales and half-remembered lore. Armed with a flickering lantern and a heart pounding with both fear and determination, I descended the cracked stone steps leading beneath the nave. The air grew colder, damper, thick with the musty scent of forgotten time. My footsteps echoed hollowly as I moved through narrow corridors lined with ancient carvings and chipped statues, remnants of a world lost to ruin. Strange symbols caught my eye, etched deep into the walls, glowing faintly as if alive with some otherworldly energy. The choir's hymn seemed to pulse in the air itself, the sound now a tangible thread weaving through the shadows, wrapping around my senses and tugging at the edges of my mind. I fought to hold on to clarity, to separate reality from the creeping tendrils of despair that threatened to unravel me. Back above, voices rose in heated argument. Elias's pragmatic caution clashed violently with Caleb's biting cynicism, while Mara's wavering faith sought to bridge the widening gulf. Sister Agnes stood between them, her voice a fragile thread of calm in a storm of doubt and fear. As I explored the subterranean depths, the truth remained elusive, a whispered puzzle suspended in the darkness. Yet I could not turn back. The choir's hymn was no longer a distant melody, it was a summons, a snare, a riddle woven into the very fabric of our shattered world. And I, burdened with both hope and dread, was determined to unravel it before the choir claimed more souls. The cathedral seemed alive in the half-light, shadows shifting just beyond the edge of vision, voices rising and falling like waves upon a shore of silence. Each step forward was a step deeper into the unknown, a plunge into a mystery that might save us or doom us all. And as the night stretched on, the haunting refrain of the choir's hymn echoed endlessly in my mind, a relentless reminder that in this place, salvation came at a terrible price. The second vanishing was no accident, it was a warning, a challenge, and I was resolved to meet it head-on, no matter the cost. But as I paused in the darkness, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon me, one question lingered, cold and unyielding: what secrets did this cathedral truly hold? And would the answers bring deliverance or despair? The choir's song rose again, beckoning me forward into the abyss. The heavy flagstone trembled under my fingers, the rough edges biting into my skin as I levered it loose from the altar's shadowed corner. Dust and the scent of ancient stone filled the stale air, spilling forth like a breath held for centuries. A narrow stairway yawned open, swallowed by darkness so deep it seemed to drink the faint light of the shattered cathedral above. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, each pulse sensing with the disembodied choir that sang beyond these walls, an eerie lullaby promising salvation, yet laced with dread. I peered into the abyss, the faint glimmer of cold air brushing my face. Elias stood behind me, his broad frame tense, eyes sharp as ever. Sister Agnes hovered near the entrance, her gnarled hands clutching a worn prayer book, lips moving in silent invocation. The fragile hope that bound us all flickered uncertainly in the face of this descent. "Are you certain about this?" Elias' voice was low, edged with the wary pragmatism that had kept us alive this long. "We have no choice," I replied, voice barely above a whisper. "If the core's power anchors here, we must understand it." One cautious step, then another. The stairs groaned beneath our weight, crumbling stone dust swirling upward like specters in the dim light of a battered lantern. The core's hymn, distant yet unmistakable, seeped through the cracks in the floorboards above, weaving into the very air around us. It was a melody that promised reprieve yet held a sinister undertone, like a siren's call veiled in sacred song. At the bottom, the chamber unfolded like a cryptic shrine. The walls, carved from ancient stone, bore symbols that pulsed faintly with an otherworldly luminescence, cold and unyielding. Rusted relics littered the floor, shattered crosses, hymnals whose pages curled and crumbled at the edges, chalices tarnished and etched with symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when glanced at sideways. Each object whispered a story of faith corrupted, a history steeped in the apocalypse's cruel embrace. Sister Agnes moved closer, fingers tracing a faded emblem on the wall. "These markings," she murmured, voice trembling, "are from a celestial order long fallen. Their remnants echo here, trapped in this place between worlds." The whispers began then, faint voices threading through the chamber like threads of smoke. They wove discordant harmonies, overlapping and fracturing, the sound shifting and bending until reality itself seemed to fray at the edges. Shadows flickered and danced beyond the lantern's glow, shapes too vague to name but too close to ignore. A cold presence settled around me, a weight pressing deep into my bones. "It watches," I said, swallowing the rising panic, not with eyes but with sound and silence. Elias tightened his grip on the hilt of his knife, jaw clenched. "We're not alone down here." I forced myself to steady my breath, to push back the creeping fear that sought to consume every thought. This chamber was the heart of the choir's enigma, the source of its dark hymn. To protect the survivors, to save what fragile hope remained, I had to confront it even if it meant walking into the abyss. As we ascended back toward the cathedral's hollowed nave, the choir's melody followed, weaving into my thoughts like a thread tying me to some terrible fate. The relics, the symbols, the whispers, they all spoke of a salvation stained with loss, a grace that demanded a price no soul could fully bear. Elias's voice broke through my reverie. "We can't trust the choir. Not anymore," I nodded, feeling the weight of leadership settle heavier than ever before. The hidden chamber had revealed truths darker than I dared imagine, but it had also steeled my resolve. We would face the choir, unravel its song, and fight for those still clinging to life within these shattered stones. Outside, the cold wind whispered through broken, stained glass, carrying the fading echoes of a hymn that was both a promise and a curse. The cathedral, once a sanctuary of faith, now stood a monument to the fragile endurance of hope amid ruin, and beneath its stones the choir waited, singing on. The cathedral's cold stones seemed to absorb the murmurs of whispered accusations and unspoken fears, their ancient surfaces bearing silent witness to the fractures growing within our small group. I sat perched on a broken pew, the journal resting on my knees like a fragile lifeline, yet the words I sought to inscribe refused to form. Outside, the choir's hymn began to rise, weaving its eerie tendrils through the hollowed nave, thickening the air with a melody both haunting and seductive. Elias approached me then, his heavy boots thudding against the cracked floor, a shadow cast long and imposing. His stocky frame was hunched with tension, scars etched deep in his weathered skin catching the faint light like ancient runes. "You rechasing ghosts," he said, voice rough but steady, eyes burning with the pragmatism that had kept us alive this far. "This obsession with the core, it's tearing us apart. We need order, not riddles." I met his gaze, seeing not just frustration, but an undercurrent of fear. "Order without understanding is blind," I replied, voice low yet firm. "If we don't uncover the core's nature, how can we protect ourselves?" He shook his head, exasperation warring with concern. "Protection means sticking to what we know. Survive the night, not chase salvation that might be a trap." The tension between us crackled like static, a clash of belief and skepticism that had become the group's uneasy undercurrent. Elias represented the harsh reality, the need for survival grounded in discipline and caution. I, haunted by memories of a life steeped in faith and scholarship, was drawn inexorably toward unraveling the core's enigma, even as doubt gnawed at my resolve. Meanwhile, Mara moved through the gathering shadows with a silent urgency I had not noticed before. Her pale face, once alight with devout fervor, now bore traces of doubt and fear. At times, she would join the core's hymn with trembling voice, her slender frame swaying as if held aloft by fragile hope. Yet when eyes met hers, a flicker of something unspoken passed between us, an unsteady wavering that tugged at my heart. One night, as the core's voices reached their ethereal crescendo, I found Mara absent from the circle. Panic flared briefly before I noticed the faint outline of her figure slipping beneath the cathedral's arches. I called after her, but the shadows swallowed my words. I followed, heart pounding in my chest, the cold air thick with the scent of damp stone and ancient dust. The melody lingered, more insistent now, pulling at Mara like a siren's call. I caught glimpses of her pale form moving toward the core's source, a fragile wraith drawn to a flame that could consume her. When she vanished beyond the veil of sound, a sharp cry echoed a haunting rupture in the night that shattered our fragile calm. The survivors stirred, eyes wide with fear and suspicion. Elias's voice cut through the rising panic. She shouldn't have gone alone. We were not safe while this core holds sway over us. I stood amid the chaos, the weight of leadership pressing down like a stone. The core's hymn hovered still, a spectral embrace that promised salvation yet demanded a terrible price. As Mara disappeared into its depths, the fissures within our group deepened. Faith and fear, hope and suspicion tangled into a tangled knot that threatened to unravel us all. In the quiet moments that followed, I sought refuge in my journal, the ink flowing at last but stained with the shadows of doubt. Could I hold them together? Could I protect what remained? Or would the Choir's song claim us one by one, until only silence remained within the ruined cathedral's bones? The night pressed on, heavy and unyielding, the Choir's hymn a relentless pulse beneath the shattered vaults. And somewhere in the darkness, Mara's voice had fallen silent, swallowed by the very salvation she had sought. I closed my eyes, listening to the fading echoes, knowing the true fracture was not just within the group, but within myself. The battle between belief and terror was only beginning, and I was caught in its merciless grip. The next night would bring no answers, only the haunting promise of the Choir's next hymn, and the dreadful silence that followed. Night had fallen like a shroud over the cathedral, the desolate shell of stone and shattered glass, holding the remnants of our fragile sanctuary. Mara had been restless all day, her devout faith simmering beneath the surface, a fragile flame flickering in the oppressive shadows. As the survivors gathered beneath the high, broken arches, an uneasy silence passed among us, each of us drawn by the haunting promise of the Choir's hymn, yet haunted by the memory of those who had vanished before. She stepped forward alone, slender and pale, her haunting eyes reflecting the dim candlelight that barely held back the darkness. The Choir's melody began to swell, ethereal voices weaving a tapestry of sound that seemed both a balm and a snare. The notes resonated through the cathedral's bones, wrapping around each of us like a spectral embrace, promising salvation even as they whispered of doom. I stood close, heart pounding, watching Mara's figure as she lifted her head, singing softly along with the disembodied choir. There was a lightness to her movements, a fragile hope that belayed the dread that tightened my chest. Around us, the others watched in silence, some with reverence, others with suspicion. Elias's steady gaze never wavered from her, his stocky frame tense, ready to intervene if the shadows took her. Then, abruptly, the choir's hymn ceased. The last note faded into the cold stone air, leaving a silence so deep it roared in my ears. Mara was gone. A stunned hush fell over the gathering, broken only by a rising tide of frantic calls, her name echoing through the vast, empty nave. I called out too, voice raw with panic, pushing through the crowd and into the shadowed aisles. The cold walls seemed to close in, swallowing sound as if mocking our desperation. Flickering candlelight cast grotesque shapes, shadows twisting and writhing in the gloom. Elias was beside me, his voice sharp with anger and fear. "This can't go on," he spat. "Your obsession with the choir is tearing us apart. If she's gone, it's 'cause you let it happen." Caleb's sneer cut through the tension. "Maybe the choir isn't salvation, it's a trap. And you're the one leading us into it." His words fanned the growing flames of mistrust, splitting the survivors into factions of believers and skeptics. I felt the weight of their accusations like stones on my chest, but beneath it all burned an even darker truth. Mara's disappearance was no accident. The choir's promise came at a terrible cost, one we had been desperate to ignore. Guilt gnawed at me. Had I failed to protect her? Had my hope blinded me to the danger? Later, alone in the quiet corner of the cathedral, I opened my journal, fingers trembling as I traced the lines of my own thoughts and fears. The ancient texts Sister Agnes had shared lay scattered around me, their cryptic warnings now cutting sharper than ever. The distant echo of the choir's hymn haunted the silence, a ghostly reminder that our sanctuary was also our prison. I knew then that the path ahead would demand more than courage, it would require sacrifice. And yet, the question that burned brightest in my mind was impossible to answer. Who would be next to vanish into the choir's eternal song? The night stretched on, heavy with dread and desperate hope, as the ruined cathedral held its secrets tight. Outside, the apocalypse waited. But within these walls, the true battle between faith and fear had only just begun. And as the first pale light of dawn crept through the fractured stained glass, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The cathedral's battered nave was thick with unease, the brittle silence shattered by sharp words and bitter accusations. The survivors, once bound by fragile hope in the choir's salvation, now stood divided, a schism forged in fear and doubt. I watched as Caleb stepped forward, his lean frame tense, eyes gleaming with a fierce need to unravel the illusions that held us captive. "We can't keep pretending," Caleb's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. "This choir isn't salvation. It's a trap, a snare that's already taken too many of us. Mara's gone, and who's next? We follow these ghostly songs and we vanish one by one. Is that the future we want?" The words hung heavy in the stale air, stirring a storm of whispers and glances. Mara's disappearance had left a wound raw and bleeding, and now Caleb's defiance threatened to tear the fragile fabric of our community apart. I felt the weight of their eyes turn toward me, the unspoken question pressing down. What did I believe? Could I still cling to hope when it felt like the choir was a siren's call to oblivion? My heart pounded with the urgency of their need for answers, but the more I searched within, the more the lines blurred between salvation and horror. Elias, ever the sentinel, stepped beside Caleb, his stocky form a steadying presence. "Doubt's natural," he said gruffly, voice steady despite the tension. "But we can't let it unravel us. We need order, not chaos." His words were a bomb to some, yet a spark to others. The room fractured into murmuring factions, those clinging to faith, those succumbing to fear. Mara's absence was a ghost that haunted every corner, her pale face a symbol of fragile belief and the high cost it demanded. In the midst of the clamor, Sister Agnes moved quietly to my side, her lined face a map of sorrow and wisdom. Her voice, low and trembling, drew me close. "The choir is not what it seems," she whispered, eyes darting nervously. "Ancient texts speak of a song that binds and devours. A melody born from ruin, neither holy light nor dark. It is a crossroads, faith's test, or a descent into oblivion." Her cryptic warning deepened the shadow that had settled over my heart. The choir was no simple hymn of hope. It was a force with a dual nature, a twisted echo of the apocalypse itself. Marat knelt nearby, her slender form bowed in silent prayer, lips moving in trembling devotion. Her fragile faith was a fragile flame in the gathering dusk, a stark contrast to Caleb's harsh skepticism. Elias watched over her like a guardian, the scars on his hands a testament to battles fought and lost not just with enemies, but with the darkness within. I felt the weight of leadership press down on me like a shroud. To guide was to choose sides, to face the impossible task of holding together a group unraveling at the seams. The choir's melodies lingered in the air, haunting, seductive, a siren's call that promised salvation yet whispered of sacrifice. As the night deepened, voices rose and fell in fractious debate, hope and fear warring in every heart. I closed my eyes, hearing the choir's hymn swell beyond the shattered stained glass, a haunting symphony that blurred the line between grace and damnation. Could faith survive in a world where every prayer might be the last? Could hope endure when the price was the vanishing of those we cherished? The answer remained elusive, a fragile thread woven through the darkness. And so the choir sang on, its eerie hymn wrapping around us like a shroud, drawing us deeper into the mystery, into the impossible choice between salvation and loss. The night stretched before us, heavy with silence and song. Somewhere in that haunting melody, the truth waiting for us to listen, to understand, to decide.